how did you get around to investing in Ethereum?
I hosted Vitalik in Hong Kong 15 times. He also would stay at my place in Taiwan. Agents will eat the world. It's no longer software will eat the world, it's agents will eat the world. I think that Web 4 will assimilate Web 3. I actually think the killer app for Web 3 is Web 4. The rails for truly decentralized digital existence. What is the ultimate expression of digital existence? It's an agent. So it just stands to reason that agents are really the killer app. And this is the rise of Web 4. It's actually agents using crypto and blockchain.
Hey everybody, back again. Super excited as always, and this time to be here with Jehan Chu, a real OG in crypto. And we met back in Hong Kong a long time ago. And I remember really clearly that you were talking about Ethereum at the time, before anybody knew what Ethereum was. Bitcoin was the only thing people were talking about. And you were a strong advocate for Ethereum in Hong Kong. So it was really, super glad to have you back here. You're an icon in the industry, having fed and seeded a lot of different protocols and products across the crypto landscape. And thanks for taking the time out and joining.
My pleasure, Stefan. Thanks for having me. It's always good to talk with old friends about old things and then kind of try and prognosticate about the future.
And that's what we're going to do. So it's perfect. Perfect. Yeah, maybe a bit of background story. How did you get into crypto and sort of overall, how did you get into it and your background, maybe a little bit, just so the people have a bit of context?
Yeah, I mean, I have, one of those, like many people in crypto, I have kind of a twisty, turny path into it. I think the early days were always populated by us kind of fringe characters or people coming in through the side doors. So mine was no different. I started off as like a front-end developer in New York, which seems like a pretty straightforward path into crypto. But I was working for a startup, the first domain name auction site. And then I was hired by Sotheby's, the auction house, to do technology, help to build out their website and their online auctions. They moved into Hong Kong back in 2006 to be the head of client development for the APAC region. And that was more of like a business function. That was super interesting. I got to, talk to, multi-billionaires and massive family offices and sell them stuff. So that was super fun. And then I actually left and they wanted me to move back to New York. And I was like, I love Hong Kong. I'm not leaving. And so I left and became an art dealer. So it was August 2008 that I left. And went on my own, which was not great timing because September was GFC.
Oh,
yeah. And so it was really interesting kind of transition. But luckily, I kind of made it through. I mean, if you can start a business during GFC, like you can basically survive anywhere. And that was a great training ground for me. And so I became an art dealer and I was building art collections for, ultra high net worths and family offices. And I was really into art. I was collecting myself. I was investing myself. And then 2013, I read an article about the Winklevoss twins, who we were both on the same cap table of an art startup. And so that was kind of my clue in. And although I didn't know them personally at that time, I was just like, oh, this is interesting. And they were talking about Bitcoin. I was like, what's that? And the phrase that got me was that, Bitcoin now is what the internet was back in 94, right? That old kind of truism. And I was, I was in college, but I was in the internet in 94 or high school. And I missed that opportunity as a concept and as an investment and as like a space. I just too young. I couldn't really contextualize anything. But, with a few years on me, I was able to really look at, wow, if this is really the internet, the new internet, then like I got to be a part of it. And I just positioned myself next to it, started, helped to start the Bitcoin Association of Hong Kong with Leonard Weiss and a lot of, Aurélien Menant and a bunch of other people. And then I started the Ethereum community and then I was off and running. That was 2013.
Yeah, no, those were days. Yeah. So the Winklevoss, weren't they one of the first investors in BitInstant, Charlie Shrem's company or something as well, right?
Maybe so. I don't remember. Yeah, I didn't really know Charlie. So I wasn't really kind of part of that, but they were so early in so many things. So I think they had
And
their
I think we,
biggest
yeah,
outpost.
I think the other thing, right? You were really early on in Hong Kong, right? And I think we were
Yeah,
talking about it just before we got online, which was really how Hong Kong at the time was a hub for a lot of innovation around crypto.
yeah, for
And
sure.
you were right at the center of that with the Bitcoin Association and ultimately getting into the Ethereum sort of community. How did you daggle that? I mean, that must have been a bit of an interesting element. Bitcoin, Ethereum, love-hate relationship there that was right from
You
the
know,
word go, right?
just I saw this TikTok recently, which was talking about the power of conveners,
Yeah.
and how DJs and to some in Melbourne, they were talking using the example of Melbourne, the people who have all the cultural clout are actually these like home chefs that bring people together and make food. And and it kind of occurred to me that like that's a little bit what my superpower is. It's just to convene. I'm not the smartest guy. I'm not the most technical guy. I definitely hustle, but I think where I've been really successful is just being early and bringing people together. And absolutely, that's what my origin story in crypto was. In Bitcoin, with again the Bitcoin Association,
Yeah.
there was just this desire to have something exist that was more official. And so, we started the Bitcoin Association. And there was a group of, 5 or 6 of us. Definitely, there were a few of us that were more active than others. And for me, just being a part of that, and being able to kind of create an anchor, like a tent pole for people to come to, and talk about things and just gather and convene, that was really, really powerful. And then although I wasn't the president, I was definitely more active. And that kind of led to Ethereum because I had seen Vitalik's presentation about Ethereum. I think it was Miami.
In Miami. Yeah.
I wasn't in Miami, but I saw it online, and I was like,
Yeah.
man, this guy's awkward, but everything he's saying sounds very authentic and it sounds very credible. And I think that was in stark contrast to some of the other kind of um, blockchain projects that were out there, like Colored Coins and Mastercoin, which were a little bit more kind of disparate. And so I kind of just followed Vitalik, and nobody was talking about Ethereum in Hong Kong as well. The best way for me to kind of learn about it is just to start talking about it. And it's that case of, in a world of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. And I just knew a little bit more than everybody else, and I was willing to bring people together. So the first, Ethereum meetup in Hong Kong was at Blackbird in Shangwan. If you remember that bar,
Yeah. Yeah.
upstairs, it was dark. It was on Zoom. And actually, the person that spoke was Stefan Tool
Oh, yeah.
from. So Stefan was early Ethereum, but he was the founder of the DAO. Remember the DAO? The
Yes. Yes.
huge,
Of
yeah,
course. Yeah. Yeah. Now hack
yes,
and
he was the
everything.
founder of
Yeah.
the DAO. Yeah, and so he was actually the first person to talk to us. He was, I think, head of marketing at Consensus or at Ethereum Foundation at the time, and so that was the beginning.
Yeah, but I think also on that note, the amount of Asian investors in Ethereum really early on that struck it really, struck gold. I mean, literally with Ethereum supporting Vitalik. I mean, the amount of stories you hear, oh, Vitalik slept on my sofa over here and we backed him when he was really early on. I mean, you must have had your hand in opening those doors, bringing him to Asia and, yeah, in those
Yeah,
days, right? Nobody knew about
yeah,
Ethereum in
yeah. I
Asia.
mean, so I started the Ethereum meetup in, I think, March of 2014. This is 3 months
Yeah.
after the white paper was written. Vitalik came to Hong Kong, I think, in June to do. I think it was like, I can't remember what it was called, but maybe it was just like Bitcoin Hong Kong or something like this. I can't remember exactly what the name of the thing was. And he was speaking, and then I was like, "Hey, I run the Ethereum meetup. Can you come and speak at my meetup?" He's like, "Sure." And it was at the Hive, in Wan Chai.
A bit more upmarket this time.
Yeah, just a little bit. Yeah, it was maybe 20 people. And he was it was gobbledygook, I think, to most people because he went right into the technology and he was kind of coding on screen and everything. And so that began our relationship. And I think I hosted Vitalik in Hong Kong 15 times. He also would stay at my place in
Yeah.
Taiwan. And yeah, so it was really interesting. I mean, those early years, 14, 15, 16, when he wasn't as high profile, but still obviously brilliant. Yeah, I mean, we would go on hikes together, we would eat together, and it was nice. It was nice actually. those early days. And I think that obviously gave me a lot of credibility in the community, but then also gave me a lot of kind of, I would say, imparted on me the kind of gravity of what Ethereum was all about.
Yeah.
Just kind of being, constantly around him, and seeing how people interacted with him, and seeing how, he just kind of floated along, and really, he wouldn't come in with a sledgehammer. He would always come in with a very kind of, a very golden feather, you
Yeah.
know.
Blank
Um,
sheet of paper or an
yeah,
open
it was
book.
always very elegant. He
Yeah.
always had this kind of brilliance and elegance to him, which I always really appreciate, and a very consistent way of presenting himself and the technology and the mission, as one which I think was the foundation of kind of Ethereum's culture, which to this day I think is what sustains so much of Ethereum in the face of other kind of competitors. But
Definitely.
anyway, I digress.
Yeah. Yeah, no, but I think that's interesting, right? So how did you get around to investing in Ethereum and the token issuance and the TGE associated with that? And then, yeah, and then ultimately that led to your new, not more art dealing, but actually more, sort of, yeah, becoming a big investor across the Ethereum ecosystem, I guess.
Yeah, the of course, just like everybody else, I invested in the Ethereum crowd sale, so no kind of special tricks there. I just
Yeah.
put in my
Just
BTC just like everybody
Bitcoin.
else.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and just like everybody else, I should have put in more, but it's interesting because I still have a wallet which still has some of that kind of Genesis Ethereum, and it's like I don't think I'll ever sell it just because it's kind of fun to have that just sitting
Nostalgic.
there.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
nostalgic. Um, but then from there, I mean, that kind of, I was never an investor. I think I'd done like a few angel investments in some like a baby juice company and some random other things, right? But I
Yeah,
didn't really understand what investing was.
yeah,
But it was actually participating in ICOs and crowd sales in the very early days. We're talking like the 15, 16 era,
yep.
um, that helped me understand this idea and kind of develop my concept of investing, quote unquote. Um, and I think the earliest projects that I invested in were, you know, I had this thesis that, okay, well, Ethereum was great. Obviously, I was in Bitcoin, some other random coins. I invested in MadeSafe, which was supposed to be, also, I think, decentralized compute, I believe. Um, but then I think some of the really early big ones that I had were Qtum, which was quantum. It
Yeah,
was
yeah,
it was supposed to be
quantum. Yeah, yeah,
Chinese
yeah,
Ethereum, right?
yeah.
And that, I mean, that was one of those 1,000xers, and it was just kind of crazy. Yeah, ridiculous. And of course, even though I didn't sell all at the peak, like it really absolutely kind of helped to anchor me for kind of future investments. And then the other one was another Ethereum kind of competitor, which was Icon, which is Korean Ethereum. And so I had this
Yeah,
thesis
yeah,
around, kind of geographic Ethereums,
yeah,
who would actually service, kind of local appetite for decentralized computer, basically.
yeah,
And while I never thought they would actually beat Ethereum, the investment case and the ability for, ironically, these kind of decentralized global systems to be so local in
yeah.
flavor and in community, was an interesting and very, I would say, lucrative kind of investment angle at that time.
Yeah. But I think you're seeing it's sort of similar today, right? I mean, where you've got like, in a way, you've got the layer twos on top of Ethereum, which all target specific niche categories. You've got the Solana, which has its whole own ecosystem of its own Oracle service, its own exchanges, etc. And now you're trying to see the same evolve into the whole Move ecosystem and on the Polkadot ecosystem too, right? I mean,
100%.
yeah, Cosmos ecosystems. I mean, they're all sort of building their own clusters, and yeah, domains, which ultimately represent new. I don't know. I mean, if you go down Balaji's path with the network states, right? Are they whole states in their own right, in on a network basis, right? I mean, if you look at them, they're all very advocate. The advocacy associated with those platforms or those ecosystems are very strong.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there are. It's interesting because blockchain is supposed to connect everything, right?
Yeah,
That's the whole idea,
yeah,
and yet we remain in these early days. I mean, we're 10 years in, right? A little more than 10 years in. We remain very tribal. And actually, no, what are we? We're like more than that, 15 years in, right? 2009.
Yeah.
So like we remain very tribal. We remain very community oriented. Um, there are, factions. And so it's interesting to see how we just kind of, despite the technology, we as humans recreate our biases and prejudices and tendencies on the blockchain. So it's very ironic that we've kind of recreated the same issues and problems and inefficiencies um, just on the blockchain.
Oh no. Yeah, and I think it's also we've seen a lot of innovation on the blockchain, right? We've seen these new payment rails evolve. We've seen these new financial rails, let's call them, evolve. And I think you were, a big VC and a part of funding a lot of these projects. And you were also trying to innovate in terms of trying to acquire institutional investors to leverage the benefits and the opportunities that these new rails represented. Where do you see, the whole, and how do you feel right now about new innovation taking place on these new crypto rails? And then how do you see the financial venture capital sort of side evolve as these new financial rails begin to mature?
Yeah, it's a big and kind of hairy question.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, especially during our time in Hong Kong, people thought that people looked at us as like a VC fund, but
Yeah.
actually we're a family office. We never actually
Okay.
had outside funding, so we were always pretty much just investing our own capital. We had a
Yeah.
small like friends and family, kind of mostly employee and partner fund, just a small one in 2018. But other than that, we're not like some of the other big guys, Pantera, Multicoin, et cetera, where we have outside capital. So we always, for better and for worse, we're investing our own money with our own theses, which gave us a lot of latitude, but at the same time, also didn't have as many of the same kind of like guardrails and I would say, um, kind of not dependencies, but accountabilities to
Yeah.
LPs. So we were very kind of loose. I kind of describe our investment process as footloose and fancy free, which is quite great because it allowed us to do so many different things and sample.
Yeah.
And because so much of blockchain, uh, everything converges back onto the blockchain. So our thesis was really like this hyperlateralism where we'd invest in so many different things from security to metaverse to NFTs to DeFi to identity to spatial compute, all these different things, with the common thread really just being the blockchain itself.
Yeah.
And it allowed us to actually tie together so many different companies and founders and cross pollinate because we were just in so many different things, because nobody said, hey, you've got to invest this way, or hey, you told us you were going to invest this way. And I love that. I mean, it's not for everybody, and I don't pretend that it's the most efficient or effective way of investing, but it certainly was fun, and it certainly was educational. And to your point, we did get to touch so many founders
Yeah.
at the earliest stages. Now, where do we go from here? I mean, we've invested in over, I would say, 350 companies in our history. Probably a lot more, especially recently, because we've really kind of dove quite
Double
deeply.
down. Yeah.
I think that VC is changing generally, not just in
Yeah.
crypto, but the rise of AI, the rise of generative AI and code creation, the kind of the reduced need for these large founding teams, which can really be replaced by a lot of coding, agentic coding. Um, it's changing the need of capital for startups, and I think that what used to take, say, a 10 to 15 person founding team, you could probably do with 3 to 4 people now, and a bunch of agents
Yeah.
if you're optimized. And so you no longer need, $2 to $4 million of seed capital. Now you can probably do it with $1,500,000. You could bootstrap it, and you can get pretty far. And the ability to kind of launch tokens, it's so much faster, so much easier, so much, more seamless, and you can get to market and you can start to, kind of potentially bring in capital through a token sale, whereas it used to take 6 months to a year to do that in the earlier generations. So that's all kind of creating this reduced need for seed capital from venture. And I think that's true across the board, regardless of whether you're raising, Web 2 or Web 3 token or equity. And what that means is that for VCs, it's going to create a lot of pressure to create better types of opportunities for them. For me, and also I think the other dynamic is that a lot of VCs, especially because of the last vintage of venture capital, they just haven't really been returning money to LPs. And so I think that LPs are starting to kind of say, well, I need a constant flow of kind of distributed capital from the venture funds that I'm invested in, and it better be pretty juicy returns because I'm taking more risk. And when you don't have that, they start to turn away and look at, well, what's the second best option versus VC, early stage VC. And so I think there is kind of a little bit of a pause for LPs to be investing in venture capital. And absolutely, I'm part of the Kaufman Fellows program, which is primarily early stage VCs. We are seeing VCs go out of business, like early stage VCs, who are on the kind of lower quartiles. And for me, I think, well, I have the option to invest in tokens. I can invest in SAFTs. I can invest in liquid tokens. I can invest in kind of treasury rounds. Does it still make sense for me to invest in a pure equity startup, at the seed stage, and try to follow this for 5, 6, 7 years, hoping for an exit?
Maybe more, right?
Or
20,
more,
15
right?
years. Yeah, 12,
Right.
15
We were
years.
we were seed investors in BlockFi back in 2017. We invested at a $6 million valuation. Can you imagine? $6 million valuation.
Yeah.
We were one of the first checks in. We followed that all the way to Series D before they blew up with first through FTX and then after FTX. First with Luna, I think it was Luna, and then with FTX. At the peak valuation, our position was worth over 9 figures, over $100 million.
Wow.
Yeah, our position.
Your position at that 6 million valuation, right?
We had probably put in somewhere between $8 to $11 million of capital into it, and it blew up, right? Yeah. And now that's a special situation, but it's not that special. I mean, companies we work, right, fail to make it all the time. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is the appetite for these long lockups with the pressure of, the VC game changing and early stage investing changing, maybe it makes more sense for me just to invest in tokens, liquid tokens. And the way that we're seeing agentic AI, we're seeing really interesting applications that come out the gate with a fully diluted, fully formed token where they're trying to drive application utility. I mean, that to me, immediate liquidity or full liquidity within 3 to 6 months, that starts to be the name of the game. Of course, fundamental utility, of course, like applications that solve problems that people will pay for. That's still table stakes. But when you think about liquidity and you think about, as an investor, and I don't even have LPs to answer to, I'm just talking about myself.
Yeah.
It starts to...
What do you call it? Footloose and fancy free?
Footloose,
or what was
fancy
it?
Free. Footloose and fancy free. I mean, it's
brilliant.
Yeah. So I have to say that this year, and especially with the advent of agentic AI, where we're seeing really interesting projects, at least the first generation of really interesting projects that are fully liquid, fully investable at seed round prices. Like if I can get into an agentic AI, project that has a feasible, like strong fundamental coin attached to it, utility coin and utility model, at a $20 million valuation, $25 million valuation, and it's fully liquid, I have the ability to trade in, to trade out, to trade around it, to take positions while still keeping a long bias about what that fundamental application will do. Why wouldn't I do that? So I'm definitely thinking about the future of venture and investing and equity versus token, and wondering, where am I best positioned?
Yeah, I mean, I'd sort of echo that, right? I mean, I think you look at traditional VC funding, right? It's 7, 12, like you said, years that you're tied to a business project, and you still have a huge amount of uncertainty because the markets are always changing. And now even faster, right? We're seeing so much more volatility in the markets that it makes it a lot more uncertain if you have to wait 12 years before you can exit. And crypto was always fun at the beginning. You just always had visibility into an exit into the next 1, 2 years. You saw an exit opportunity when the next bull market came around, or you had to go through a winter. And that's when ultimately you saw great opportunities, great builders picking up their tools and then building and coming out in a 2, 3 year time window. And I think that sort of, from my perspective at least, that's sort of gone by the wayside, especially with more institutionalization of the venture capital market. The less they weren't footloose and fancy free, right? They were the exact opposite. They were handbound by LPs that were
Yeah.
asking for a return. It's so risky. What are you doing? The markets are really volatile. I want out now. The market's dropped 40%. And you had the tenacity and the flexibility to continue to seed fund these projects. And it's interesting to see that now you're moving and shifting into more liquid assets. You want even faster exits, right? You want, which is,
Well,
or maybe
I'll
exits
modify
is the
that a
wrong
little bit.
word, but
Yeah,
yeah,
I'll modify it a little bit. It's not necessarily about the exit. It's really about
yeah,
the optionality, right? Because
yeah,
for me, I'm not a trader. I'm a
yeah,
terrible trader. Um, I am at my best when I'm investing in a company that has a very clear um, mimetic narrative,
yeah,
which contributes to the advancement of technology and society, because I can sell that. You know what I mean?
yeah.
I buy it and then I sell it. I imbibe and kind of embed that idea deep into my cortex, and then I can just repeat it. And that's when I'm at my best. So the kind of short-term flip, the short-term trade, that doesn't work for me because
Yeah.
it doesn't root itself. But so ultimately, I'm always like a long investor. But it's the kind of the ability to secure the investment, the ability to, um, you know, I would say diversify, to take profit when I need to, so that I can redeploy into more projects. That's actually the biggest thing.
That's really
When you're
important.
Yeah, when you're a family office, you're always bound by, you don't have committed outside capital which just sits there. For me, I remain almost always kind of fully deployed.
Yeah.
And so when I want to buy something else, I often have to sell something else. And I hate selling things because I believe in the idea, and selling means somehow, kind of abandoning a little bit that idea that I believe in. So it always pains me to sell. Um, but I always want to invest in other things. And so it's always this kind of constant tension about, selling so that I can buy other things. But always, I always, I love the idea. And ultimately, I'm just an idea investor. Some people are tech investors, like technology investors. Some people are more like, I would say, thematic investors. They're really great at portfolio construction. Some people are traders, but I'm an ideas guy. I buy and sell ideas, and that's kind of like what drives me and why I do this. Kind of profits aside.
And then when you, just on that note, before I go into the ideas, because I'm intrigued by that as well, but when you actually do a sell something and buy something new, do you ideally, are you focused more on the intellectual stimulation and the idea behind it itself? Or do you say, if I pull out of this idea, I'm going to lose maybe a 20, 30% increase or a double fold. This would need to make up for that, in not only intellectually but also financially, outperform that other where I'm selling, right?
Oh yeah, that opportunity cost. Yeah, I mean
Yeah, the opportunity
that's a
cost,
really really
exactly.
kind of insightful question. Um, because I'm not selling out of the idea totally and not selling the position totally, it allows me to, you know, obviously I'm selling positions that are already up many multiples, and so it allows me to just say sell 5-10% of the position and then
Yeah,
redeploy. So I don't have to abandon my kind of conviction around an idea completely. I can still express my belief and enthusiasm for the initial idea or the initial kind of project, while diversifying into others. But I do think about that. I do think about the opportunity cost. Do I think that, if something has gone up 40x, I still have a hard time selling at that level to invest in something which could be another 40x, but is at a pre-seed stage. I would say that I'm always guilty of holding too long from a market timing perspective. I'm unable to time markets. It's just not my forte, because I don't really look at markets. I look at ideas,
categories or industries.
Yeah, I look at categories. I look at ideas, and I look at fundamental kind of anchors and primitives. So, for example, I love the space of geospatial compute. So geospatial compute answers one of the main primitives of kind of blockchain. And one of these primitives is like, who are you, right? This is like the world coin thing. Who are you on the blockchain? Who are you on the internet? And how do you prove that? Another primitive is, where are you, right? How do you connect physical location to the blockchain in a way where you can prove location, spatial awareness, spatial positioning? And there's generations of technology which can be built on top of that, in the same way that you can build generations of technology on top of identity, right? And so I've always been looking for a spatial compute, project. The first one that I saw was something called foam.space, which I didn't end up investing in. I don't know if they're still around anymore. But the one that we did invest in, and I saw another one called Versus, which we also did not invest in, because it wasn't the right thing for us. The one that we did invest in, which I'm really happy about, is called Auki, Auki, Auki Labs, which is actually a Hong Kong company.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, Hong Kong company. Swedish founder, but a Hong Kong company. And, this is one that Arthur Hayes also invested in. And I love what they're doing. And so this idea of, somebody is going to solve this extremely valuable primitive of expressing where you are on the blockchain. And, I will die on this hill, trying to find, the solution to this problem. And right now it's Auki, and I think they're doing a great job, but there will be others. And so there's all these different primitives that I want to invest in, and I will maintain a long bias on these ideas, even if I invest in, kind of various expressions of these ideas.
Which sort of maps to where AI is going, right? It's so easy to replicate not only my voice, my facial expression, and create an artificial visualization of myself, on screen. How do you know it's actually me and not some AI bot on this other side of the video chat, right? It's like, am I here? Is this me, right? Where am I, right? And things. I think all of that is going to become an important component to your new identity in the future, right? It's not just going to be a passport, a 2D book that you walk around with. It's actually going to be a digital impression with some sort of, zero knowledge sort of proof concept around it or something like that. That you don't need to fill out 500 forms each time they ask you for a KYC or an AML.
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, it's actually great timing to have this podcast, because I've got like, I'm bursting with ideas around kind of AI and Agentic. So
I can feel it, man.
Love talking about it.
Yeah.
So we invested in WorldCoin, like the identity primitive, Sam Altman.
Yeah.
Back in 2021, I believe. Yeah. And we've done really well on that.
Yeah.
I think at its peak, our investment was at 100x. I think it's gone down to maybe like 25x or something like this. And we're vesting. So, but I'm mostly holding this. And to be fair, like I've kind of had to wrestle with this idea of like, well, I believe in WorldCoin as a world, it's called now, as an identity primitive, and it's going to be so valuable. It doesn't make sense to sell, even at like 40x, doesn't make sense to sell any of it to redeploy into Agentic, which is the next generation. So it's interesting that you brought that up. But my thesis on Agentic AI, is that agents will, to kind of paraphrase Mark Andreessen, agents will eat the world, right? Yep. It's no longer software will eat the world, it's agents will eat the world. I think I have this kind of concept of Web 4. I think Agentic AI is Web 4. So every web number is another additional layer of the internet. I think Web 4 is the next layer of the internet, which is populated primarily by AI agents. It's agents talking to agents
Yep.
with some humans in there,
Yep. Yep.
but it's an entire, kind of uh, layer of the internet which agents are transacting with other agents, talking to other agents with minimal, if any, human kind of interruption, interaction, or input or
Yep.
output.
Yep.
Because this layer, and I think that Web 4 will vastly outclass and outpace the rest of the internet, simply because when you have 24/7 near instantaneous transactions and communications between agents who are producing, content, analysis, trades, utility, the volume of just output and productivity will just exponentially outclass all other generations of internet that we have created. And I think that's where we're going. And I think that agents will kind of take on a couple different flavors. We'll have our crypto agents and our Web3 enabled agents, which have wallets and autonomy and
Yep.
personalities and interact, in social space, like on Twitter and TikTok and Instagram. And then you'll have these enterprise agents, which are more kind of industrial and functional, which don't express themselves, in kind of narrative, but are producing output, like within whatever SAP and Salesforce and kind of Google and Apple, all in the background. But they'll all convene in this Web 4 layer. So that's kind of the huge opportunity. And
Yeah.
as of and I'm late to it, right? I only kind of really started drinking the Kool-Aid in December, but I took all of it. Maybe too much too fast, but I fully believe that agentic AI will evolve into this layer of the internet, and that we won't have interfaces anymore. We'll just have agents that we talk
Yep.
to.
Yep.
We won't need to type. We won't need to. We won't want to type.
Yep.
We won't want to try and kind of code. Everything will be intent based. We will express our needs, and the agents will kind of interpret and kind of coordinate into into basically executing our intent.
So how do you look at that? I mean, I couldn't agree more, right? I mean, just especially what we've seen over the last 6 months, 12 months, the velocity of innovation around AI and the development of agentic AI and the amount of talent it is acquiring to build around these solutions. And it's all open sourced. So the
Yep.
evolution is even accelerated on top
Yeah.
of that. It's not proprietary. There's no patent protection. It's just all open source. That's the competitive advantage today, right?
Yeah.
How do you leverage that?
Well, it's interesting because there's a kind of historical and linear precedent for how this gets leveraged, right?
Yeah.
It's open source, and so developers go in and they kind of fork it and they add to it,
Yeah.
and they kind of redevelop it. But I think that the kind of exponential opportunity is actually agents who will actually take this code and create more
And they
agents.
create on
They
top of it. Yeah,
self-replicate,
yeah,
right?
totally.
They're viral,
Yeah, yeah,
in
yeah,
not in
yeah.
the social media sense, but in the sense that they actually self-replicate and increment, and they just don't
Distill and
stop. And and
aggregate.
the,
Yeah.
and the cost of creation is somewhat minimal, or will
Yeah.
become somewhat minimal. I mean, I'm sure that somebody out there is kind of creating an idea of a Moore's law about agents, and the population of agents versus kind of humans, and the amount of GDP that agents will create versus humans. And I know that there's already kind of talk about a country, a nation state for agents. Um, WorldCoin, well, not
Interesting.
WorldCoin. WorldCoin will identify humans,
Yeah.
but agents will also need identity. And so,
Yeah.
very, very quickly, I think that we're going to be confronted with a lot of questions, very, very
Yeah.
tough questions about how to, I don't know if resist is the right word, how to counterbalance or counteract, or, you know, the effects of agents. And already agents are doing things which I think, to put it generously, are is unpredictable.
Yeah.
A more realistic and maybe kind of pessimistic way of looking at it is malicious.
Yeah.
So all of these things are happening, in real time. People are experimenting with no guardrails, and that's good and that's bad.
Yeah.
But these are viruses, right? And as we've seen with kind of COVID, when the virus gets out of the lab, like bad things happen.
Yeah.
Um, so it's an incredibly exciting time, but I do think that in retrospect, we will look back at this time as one of the inflection points of humanity.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, and you think about, I mean, just okay. I was going to be ask a really dry question around investments and how do you invest, because there's so much innovation taking place in this space. It's so hard to tell, and what the exit opportunities are going to be like. It's
Well,
very hard to get any kind of visibility beyond a 12-month horizon, if alone that much,
yeah.
right?
I
And
mean, I think that the way that we've done it is infrastructure first. So we've
yeah,
taken positions, and anybody can. What's nice about it is anybody can take these positions. We've invested a bit in virtuals, which I
yeah,
think is at the moment kind of the market leader in kind of agents. It's a low code way to launch an agent. We also took a position in AI16Z ELIZA
yeah,
OS, which
yeah,
I think is a more developer kind of oriented. But these are first generation, kind of
yeah.
agentic frameworks. We've also invested in a project which is codenamed AI Vengers, which is a more articulated platform for agentic frameworks, and then another one called Memetica. Um, Memetica has launched a couple of agents. One is called BSD, and then another one called Bets underscore Liam, which is really interesting. They've created an agent which basically analyzes sports events and kind of gives you sports betting tips. So I think we're
Predictions.
going to see a very long tail of agents that are providing information to very niche subjects.
Yeah,
It's this kind of like Amazonification
yeah,
of kind of content into niche areas, and agents, basically no low or no cost agents which are providing um, engagement and exposure and kind of elevation to niche subjects, the way that Amazon did for niche subjects in the book market. You could sustain, a very niche subject because Amazon made it very simple and easy to discover it with very low cost. We're going to see that with agents. Um, so infrastructure, and then to some degree, agents themselves.
yeah.
I think investing directly in agents is tough because it's a bit like investing in games and movies. You gotta. It's hard to identify what's going to be a hit. But if you can invest in the infrastructure, the underlying, that's great. And I think, to be fair, I was probably too early, and I didn't read the landscape correctly. So I invested, heavily like in December and January when Agentic was really peaking, and then it, dove, it crashed,
Fizzled out.
60,
Yeah,
70,
yeah.
80%.
Huge.
Luckily, I don't have rules, so I can just hold.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that some of these will go to zero, but I'm also in a lot of infrastructure which I fundamentally believe in, so I'm able to just kind of wait it out. And as long as I maintain like a long bias, and I think that I'm invested in some of the kind of primary platforms, I think the investment will turn out great. Um, but that's how I think about it. That's how you invest in it. I think
Yeah.
that at the moment for us, we can afford to just continue investing and experimenting, um, investing as an expression of experimentation into this space. And some we're going to get right, and most we're going to get wrong. And as we've seen, um, at least our track record is that we get enough right to kind of make up for some of the wrongs, and enough wrongs actually do make it right. So it works out.
And it's interesting to see the I mean, I want to call it a bit of an arms race around AI around the world, right? You've got the US, and they're really throwing billions and $500 billion into Stargate, and lots of money going into all these different types of services. You saw China with its DeepSeek, and already that's been forked. And we've lived in China. We know how quick they innovate and how quick they disrupt. And it's
Yep.
all about the competition, survival of the fittest. And then you've seen Europe come out now. Just, I think they had this conference in France where, the EU's announced 200 billion, and then France announced another 150 billion. But I think, to your point, none of them really understand the potential, consequences of some of these things taking real strong foothold in specific directions. I mean, if AIs start interacting with each other, taking code and developing, breaking rules, what does that mean? And no matter how much you put on a piece of paper in law, how do you enforce that between agents?
You can't.
And then agents are going to become productive. If they're productive, do they need to be
Absolutely.
taxed? Because
Good
people
luck
aren't
with that.
working, the
Good luck
agents
with
are going
that
to be
because
working.
there's no rules, there's no guidelines, and there's no kind of
Yeah,
guardrails for this. So you're bringing up a really really interesting kind of existential point, and again, this is why I say we're at a very interesting inflection point for
yeah.
humanity, because there are all these questions with no answers,
No
and
answer.
you have the Elons on one side,
Yeah,
and the kind of Sam Altmans on the other side, some who are trying to ostensibly preserve or save humanity, and others who are out to kind of profit,
yeah,
which is we're a capitalist society, so you can't
yeah.
really fault that as well. Um, it's interesting that the new battlefield for humanity is being played out in the markets, you know, in real time. I think we will look back at people like Sam Altman and Elon Musk as kind of heroes and or villains, and we will look back at these figures as these kind of you know epic figures who kind of played out the future of humanity, um, as we were kind of watching, literally spectating, because it's not like we can do anything about this as kind of civilians, right? It's all being played out at this kind of super macro level,
Yeah.
with machinations and I would say kind of agendas that are way beyond the visibility of what we can see. And I am not necessarily a Trump fan myself, but I find myself constantly second guessing my assumptions, about what I think about what he's doing, because so much of where we are ending up is just in disarray, where I can no longer, I find myself unable to kind of rely on the same kind of mental models and frameworks of liberalism and what that means or used to mean anymore, because you know when I look at the trajectory of kind of society, and I'll narrow it down to like American society, I don't know that it's been on the right track. And while I don't believe in many of the things that Trump stands for, um, on the same token, I do agree that the path that we have been going down is not ideal and has not necessarily kind of been beneficial to kind of those in need, et cetera, et cetera. So there is some logic to kind of shaking something up and stirring the apple cart, but at the same time, at what cost to our integrity, to our values, to our constitution, right? You can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, and
Yeah.
at the same time, you also can't kind of continue down a path which to nowhere. So it's all chaos at the moment, and maybe arguably this kind of disruption, severe, painful, disgusting disruption, could result in some good. I can't say anymore. It's completely unbalanced, but we are at an inflection point,
Definitely.
values wise, technology wise, socially, financially, and it's going to be a wild time.
Yeah, so my comment was always, even before, sort of as Trump was sort of rising up, was we were going to see 100 days of thunder, I called it, right? And
Oh,
and
nice.
so it was really, it's going to be so much turmoil in the first 100 days. Why? Because they can implement it. When we've been working with Argentina around the Argentinian inflation index, very closely with Milei and the government over there, and
Yep.
what we've learned is that you got to do it fast, right? Because if you change it fast, then people can see the numbers, they can see the impact, and you got to make it very visible and transparent. And
Yep.
I think if we're looking at where Trump has come in the last sort of 2-3 weeks alone, the amount of turmoil that it's created. And I'm actually getting to a point where I don't think it's just going to be 100 days. I think we're going to see, 2-3 years of this take place. And it's going to be so much change and turmoil in the way that ultimately represents opportunity, right? I mean, if you're taking away so much red tape, where does that represent, and so much disruption, where does that represent opportunity? And given our conversation just now, you've been, you went through the Web 1 world. You didn't quite get able to
Too young.
participate in the first web, but you got into Web 3, right? You participated in Web 2.
Yeah.
We all experienced that.
Totally.
We got the Web 3, and now here we come with Web 4. Is your focus now ultimately moving to more Web 4 area than the Web 3? Because that's ultimately where intellectually it's also more stimulating by the looks of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I am, just because I find it exciting, and also I think that Web 4 will kind of assimilate Web 3. I actually think the killer app for Web 3 is Web 4. The rails for truly decentralized digital existence. Like, what is the ultimate expression of digital existence? It's an agent, right? It's either an autonomous agent or it's an agent acting on behalf of, the kind of needs and intents of a human. So that's what crypto is really for: payments, instructions, verifiability, security, digital assets, bridging real world assets into the digital space, scalability. Like, that's actually what Web3 is for. Web3 is a facilitator for Web4. Web3 alone and for its own sake has actually not proven out. We're 15 years in, and we still don't have I would argue, a single really compelling mass use case for crypto, other than payments. But when's the last time a normal person paid for anything with a stable coin, much less Bitcoin? Like, it's not actually, kind of proven itself useful to mainstream people. But I think that it's the lens, or the surface, or the vector of agentic Web 4 that Web 3 will really shine. It's everything. Web 3 is infrastructure. Web 4 is the expression.
I mean, I agree. I mean, I think partially because what crypto was representing was a form of capital, a form of money. And the money printing associated with crypto was not decided by established, very, very powerful entities and institutions. And so they constantly were putting roadblocks in our way, as we're seeing now. And more of that is coming to shine over time as well. And so that, I think, was a real big hurdle. But now in an agentic world, those hurdles are totally irrelevant. The AI decides for who he wants to get money from, how I get paid. And I mean, I just got back from Satoshi Roundtable, and ultimately the consensus was that at least 30% of all transactions across crypto are going to be agentic driven, right? And if not 50%, right?
It's going to go from 10% to 80% very quickly.
Very
just
quickly,
because,
right?
Again, like the kind of compounding effect of the speed of digital transactions, blockchain-based transactions, the ability for self-replicating agents and trading, and I think the volume of agents and the utility surface of agents will just continue to grow much faster than humans. And it's like, if you think about it, just even very, very macro level, like crypto and Web3 was always digitally native infrastructure, right? But digitally native infrastructure for physically native users, i.e. humans, is inefficient. But digitally native infrastructure for digitally native users, i.e. agents, is the most efficient and is the most, is the highest leverage use of that technology. And so it just stands to reason that agents are really the killer app. And this is the rise of Web 4. It's actually agents using crypto and blockchain.
And so ultimately, I think one of the things that we're already seeing today, that a lot of the hedge funds are already using agents for trading, right? So you've got maybe 40% of their on-chain transactions and trading is done with agents, right? And you're seeing, it's just and ultimately those agents are acting in a bit of a herd mentality, and maybe that's why we're seeing these rapid liquidations over such fast and tighter periods because
Sure.
of the acceleration of that adoption, right?
Yeah, to answer your question, that's I'm definitely focused on agents, and I think that's,
Yeah.
you know, to some degree, every every company that I invest in going forward, one of the questions will be, what are you doing in agentic? How are you thinking
Yeah.
about agentic?
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
will
Yeah.
agentic impact you? Like, do you know, or do you have a view? And if you don't, that's a flag.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and just sort of shifting away, right? So we look at the agentic world. I think that's also going to play out in this whole metaverse, right? What does that look like in a metaverse where it can play out a lot quicker, and
Oh
in
yeah.
many it can manifest itself in so many different ways, right?
Well, it's so interesting that you say that, because obviously there are projects now that are starting to address this. But one of our old investments called Elysium, they were a fan engagement Web3 project. They were co-founded by this kind of football legend from FC Barcelona, Carles Puyol, who's like a legendary football player. Um, Back in 2017 or 18, we invested in them, and so they were trying to do fan engagement. And you know, many years later, they've kind of pivoted their way into basically building a metaverse for AI agent avatars, which are extensions, valid kind of authorized extensions of these football stars or other kind of celebrities that you can interact with in a metaversal space. So you can go into this
Interesting.
metaverse and you can hang out with Puyol's agent. Now, I'll be honest, the first time I heard that, I was like, who's going to want to do that? But they have 2 million users, and that's
Yeah.
like kind of a lot of users, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And since the kind of rise of AI, of agentic, in the past couple of months, the mind share and the comfort and I would say the familiarity, I think that it's a foregone conclusion, within the next 6 to 12 months, we are going to see 8 agentic extensions of everybody, not just stars, but everyday people. Because if I can extend who I am and what I do with a digital twin, I will do that.
Yeah.
Right? It's just
Yeah.
it's just a step change in kind of uh, output and productivity, even in
Productivity, right?
small
Yeah.
ways, right?
Yeah.
Answering surveys, or
Yeah.
kind of attending seminars, and being able to kind of process. If I can be in many places at once, I would. How many times have people said, if I could clone myself, if I could be in 3 places at once? With an agent, you actually can. So that's absolutely going to happen. And and I do think that that's actually what the metaverse is for. It's actually to provide a cognitive um, surface for humans and avatars and AI agents to interact in a spatial way. And I think that's actually, it solves the problem of like why there's so few people in the metaverse. This actually solves that.
So coming back to now the real world, right? Sort of we go into digital sphere. We've got agents. We've got all this in the digital world. So actually, where your location is very, it becomes more and more irrelevant unless you're producing real world items. How do cities, countries, nations attract talent so that they may remain relevant in the future? We both were in Hong Kong. A lot of us have left Hong Kong, and Hong Kong's trying to get everybody to come back to Hong Kong, but it's very competitive now. You've got
Yeah.
Dubai that's providing
Yeah.
incentives. You've got Portugal, you've got New Zealand now just had a golden visa status, right? Trying to attract more talent there. The US obviously trying to do the same and get everybody to go back to the US and build in the US. What do you think where do you go today, and how do you remain relevant what's your thoughts around that, sort of where do I go and how do I remain relevant as a city or a country?
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, even though I don't spend, I'm in Puerto Rico, um, and I probably only spend a quarter of the year in Hong Kong. Like, my heart is still very much in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's kind of where I was formed as an adult in a way, and my network is still very much there.
Yeah.
I feel like, you know, I actually think Hong Kong's doing a great job of trying to reclaim and recapture its kind of former glory as the crypto capital of Asia.
Yeah.
I just read that they have authorized crypto net worth as a valid kind of qualification for an investment visa. So the Hong Kong government is really kind of encouraging more crypto people to come back.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think that, and it's not just with crypto. Migration follows resource.
Yeah.
People migrate to places where there are the resources that they need. Uh, in Hong Kong, I think that means capital.
Yeah.
I think that means availability of capital, and I think that Hong Kong is generally seen as the place to go in Asia to access capital, even above Singapore. I think Singapore has a little bit too much friction and a little bit too, like, it's not necessarily the right combination. That's not to say that it's not viable. I think if Hong Kong is a call it an 8, Singapore is probably a 6 or a 7
Yeah.
relative. I think Dubai is probably a 9 right now.
Yeah.
Again, because the perception and I think the reality that there is a lot of Middle Eastern capital that is looking to invest in this space, and the government, the UAE, has done an incredible job of both marketing itself as well as lowering the barrier to entry and existence, and obviously tax regime is very favorable there as long as you're not American. But that's why we're also in Puerto Rico. Why are so many people in Puerto Rico? If you're American, it's the only place that you can really optimize taxes fully. So I think there's capital formation, but then the other side of it is kind of expertise and mind share, and I think that's why San Francisco is so important, remains important, and New York remains so important because while New York is also capital formation and San Francisco is also capital formation, people really go there for the expertise and the mind share, and the kind of just the sheer quality of talent.
Quality of talent.
Yeah.
Do you, I mean, one thing that I sort of find, you have the quality of talent, but you also have the appetite for risk. There's a very different level of risk appetite and the pursuit of change, right? The continuous pursuit for change or betterment, right? And I think, the US just leads the rest of the world by miles in that drive. Maybe the Middle East, you could argue they're trying and they're just going balls out, to redevelop and redefine what a desert nation used to.
They have to, right? I mean, and it's that kind of frontier pioneer type of mentality.
Yeah, exactly.
Like in the US, they had to kind of innovate. It was that is the kind of the DNA of Americans. It were settlers, it were risk takers. From the first people that came over, on the Mayflower to the kind of pioneers who
go west.
Went west in search of kind of gold. I mean, to the technological pioneers in Silicon Valley. I mean, that is the DNA. And I think you're seeing the same dynamic play out in Saudi and the Middle East, where the oil economies won't last, and they know this, and so they are having to move from being risk managers to risk takers. It's a very real and very admirable attempt at self-preservation in the digital age and in the next kind of non-carbon age, which we are absolutely kind of moving towards. So I think it's amazing what they're doing. It's very inspiring. It's kind of breathtaking, and it's pretty cool actually to watch.
Yeah,
I guess the outlier, and the outlier is like, what is China going to do? Right?
Yeah.
China has a different kind of problem, like their aging population, their geopolitical positioning. I think they are no longer, kind of trying to establish themselves as they did in the kind of 80s and 90s. And so now they have a different problem. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out and how they cast themselves from, kind of this top down kind of planned economy, which has been kind of very restrictive to tech in the last 5 years.
Yeah,
it'll be interesting to see how they come out. I mean, especially with the kind of success of DeepSeek and Wukong, the game. I mean, there's still these really, really bright sparks.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing that I mean, China. One thing is they have a 5-year plan and they stick to that plan, right? And it's just that's their plan. But I think it's the most exciting time to be alive. You're super excited, and I can feel that in the conversation, right? And I actually think that we are at the start of a turn in global economy where
Yeah.
with these technologies we can see a significant leapfrog in growth,
Yep.
and this is going to represent a huge opportunity for next generations to be able to participate and generate generational wealth again, right? Beyond just the old institutions that hold a lot of the real estate today. But we might even see levels of 5, 6, 7% GDP growth over the next 3 to 4 years
Absolutely.
as it evolves, right?
Yeah, and I think again, it's such an important inflection point that we're entering right now, and I do believe that it is, the base layer of this is agentic. I think
Yeah.
we're just going to be entering the age of, obviously Web 4, but then also the age of post wealth, post authorship, post everything, because agentic will fill all these gaps. I think that there will be so much wealth generated
Yeah.
that it will start to become a bit meaningless
Yeah.
for those who have it,
Yeah.
and it'll be really, really bad for people that don't have it.
Right.
That wealth gap will
Yeah.
kind of
Just
absolutely
exasperate.
increase.
Yeah. Grow.
Yeah, but at a certain point, that will kind of flip, and I think that there will be a UBI, and
Yeah.
all of our needs, our basic needs, will be taken care of, because there's just not going to be nothing to. There's not going to be anything to do. Like literally, there's going to be very little to do. And this whole Wall-E type of society,
Yeah.
it's amazing how art and culture are very reliable predictors of the future, from kind of Snow Crash and Neuromancer to 2001 Space Odyssey. Like this
Yeah.
is this is kind of how it all goes. So it's an interesting time. I mean, it's a privilege to be able to see it. It's also terrifying, but that's life.
I think the cat is out of the bag, and there's no way we can turn it back, right? We just have to lean in and work through it. But I do feel that in a way, there are going to be jobs tomorrow that we have no clue of today.
Oh yeah.
Very much like we had no clues of jobs that we have today yesterday, right? And so I think there will be new types of activities that we will be focused on, and I think more importantly, as human race, we need to find purpose. If we don't have purpose, I think that's the biggest.
Oh yeah. You hit it right on the head, and this is something
Yeah.
that I've been thinking about and I've talked about before, which is like, I think we are the last generation, meaning everybody who's alive, who's basically kind of a teen or an adult at this point, or most like a young adult at least. We are the last generation which are born with purpose, which have innate purpose as humans. That's done. I mean, for future generations, that's done. And our primary struggle will be like how to survive our own psychoses when we don't have external purpose.
Okay, let me flip this a bit. So, taking Musk, going to Mars, there's a whole new environment that the human will be confronted with, and with the creative brains that we have,
Sure.
will we then start being able to populate and differentiate ourselves in an environment like that over agentic AIs that are going to be around, or robots that are going to be around? To be able to adapt and be creative in thinking of ways to survive in a new environment.
I actually don't think so, because I think the agents will come with us. You know what I mean? The agents will
Yeah, for
be
sure.
there
Yeah.
on the starship.
Yeah.
But
Will they be leading us, or will we be leading them on that
for
journey?
sure, they're going to be leading us. I mean, who's going to be piloting the ship? Like Elon, or like Elon's agent? Like absolutely Elon's agent. Like I would prefer that Elon's agent is kind of at the helm. So
yeah, interesting.
Yeah. Anyway, it's
On that note,
I love this conversation. It's so good just to be able to reconnect, and again, as we predicted in the beginning of the conversation, talk about the old times and prognosticate about the future.
And there's lots of opportunity. Thanks so much for your insight, Jehan,
Pleasure.
and would love to do this again sometime down the road, but and not wait X years to be able to do this. But thank you very much for your time. And how can people follow you? Do you have a Twitter?
Yeah.
Where should they go?
Yeah, you can follow me. My primary Twitter is at collectionist, COLLECTIONIST. I also have at Jehan Chu, but that's just a pointer to at collectionist. You can also
Collection.
follow us on at Kenetic Capital, but again, that's mostly I'm posting on collectionist. So see you there.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks,
Thanks, Stefan.
Jehan. Super cool. Really enjoyed this.